Right, so let's start applying some different materials to this object. So we're going to go back out of sculpt mode, into object mode, and into the material tab, and I'm going to create some different materials for the different parts of the mesh. So we've got the skin, the teeth, the gums, and the tongue. So let's add these materials. We'll click plus to add a new slot, and then we'll click new to add a new material for that slot. So new, and I'll call this one skin. Do the same again, new slot, new material, call this one teeth, and then another one, call this one gums, another one, and we'll call this one tongue. We'll just give them a different colour, so we'll set the base colour differently for each one initially. Skin, I'll give it a rough skin colour. Teeth, I'll leave white. Gums, I'll make red. And then tongue, I'll make red as well, maybe a little bit orangey. Okay, so we've got all these different materials. Let's make sure we come out of matcap mode now. So we go into studio mode, and we'll set this to be material. And in actual fact, we probably want to go into one of the rendered modes. We'll go into the preview material mode, that'll be easier. And we'll bring up the bottom and turn it into a shader editor. In fact, let's do it on the right instead. And now we're left with the principal BSDF. So how can we apply these different materials to the different parts of the object? Well, there's actually 3 different ways we can do it. The first way is to go into edit mode, and we'll choose some faces. So I'll go into face mode, I'll select some faces, and I'll say assign whichever I've got selected over here to that part of the model. So I'll click assign. Now if we come out of edit mode, you can see this part has now got this gums material. It's quite jagged edges though, of course, because the faces themselves dictate the transition between the 2 different areas. So if we just go over here, we'll turn on wireframe. We can see that we can't get a nice smooth transition between the 2 without modifying the actual geometry, which we will do in a little while. So that's the first way. The second way we can do it is to use attributes that are on the mesh. So let's come back out of edit mode into object mode, and we'll turn off wireframe now. We'll go to the data panel, and under here I'm going to get rid of this color attribute, and I'm going to go into vertex paint mode. As soon as I go into vertex paint mode, we'll get a new color attribute over here. We've got some options. We can either use this one. So if I go into vertex, we're in vertex paint mode, and I'll go over here to solid view now, make sure we're in attribute. I can actually paint on here. At the moment, we're not seeing anything because the object is white already. So if I change this to black, we can actually paint on there now. And this data, this color data that I'm painting on, is stored in the color attribute over here. Now, I could, if I wanted to, go over to paint and say, set the vertex colors, and it will set the vertex colors to whatever I've got set here. If I change this across, paint, set vertex colors, it's going to turn it to white. So I want it to be black. So swap that over into the paint menu, and we'll say set vertex colors so it's completely black. Alright, so we've got the base start now, and I can paint on here. I just change this so that white is on the left. The left one is the one that you're going to be painting with. I'll just paint a pattern, and I can turn symmetry off as well, just the same as in the sculpt mode if I want to. And then we can paint without it repeating on the opposite side. So we've got this black and white map. I can now use this black and white map to mix 2 different shaders together that are inside of the same material. So let's go back into material view. I'll go back into the material down here as well, into the panel, material panel. I'll go into edit mode on the object, and I want to assign this gums material now to the entire object. So I'll say assign. And I can now create 2 materials inside of one material. So basically the shader here is what's responsible for creating the material. So if I create 2 principal shaders inside of this one material, we can now mix them together. So I'm going to use this one as green, change this to green. I'm going to say Shift A, S, and we'll put down a mix shader node. We'll plug this one into the bottom. We'll plug this one into the top. So what this means is it's going to be driven by the factor. So 0 equals to black, which means it's going to be using the top one. 1 equals white, so it's going to be using the bottom one. So all we need to do is plug our black and white image that we've painted in onto the vertices into the factor. And to do that, we'll just rename this over here to test. I'll do Shift A, S, and we can put down an attribute node. We can either use an attribute node or we can use an attribute color node. Color attribute. They both do the same thing. The only difference is this one will allow us to choose from a list the available color attributes, whereas this one, we need to know the name and type it in. If we connect either of them directly to the material output, they'll both have the same result because they're both referring to that same color attribute. I'll get rid of that one. And now I'm going to plug this into the factor over here, and then we'll plug this shader back into the output. So this is now driving which of these two gets chosen based on the mix shader. And if we go back into vertex paint mode, we can now continue painting the materials directly onto the object. And that will allow us to get a smooth transition regardless of the geometry. And instead of painting in vertex paint mode, you can use the paint tool in schooled mode and you'll get much better performance while still writing to that same color attribute. So that's another way we can do it. And the third way we can do it is instead of using vertex colors or attributes stored in the object, which incidentally, if we want to see these, we can go over here to the spreadsheet and this will show us all of the attributes that are on the mesh. And they're stored in different elements of the mesh. So the color attribute here, test, is stored in the face corners, as we can see there. And then we've got things in the vertices, currently just the position attribute, etc. Material index in the faces. And we've got all these different element types based on the type of object that you've got selected. So I've got a mesh selected, a geometry. So we've got the vertices, edges, and faces. If you had a curve, so a line, you'd have splines. If it was a volume, you'd have volume grids, instances, etc., etc. Right, so let's go back to the 3D viewport. And the third way we can do it, as I say, is using an actual image. So we can paint onto an image and have that control the placement rather than this attribute. Now on this model, we've got sufficient geometry to allow us to paint really fine detail. But if we're using a lower resolution model, then you would need to use something else. And that's where the image texture would allow us to get nice detail because it wouldn't be sort of reliant on how much geometry is there. It's going to be using pixels instead. So the first thing we'll need to do when using this image method instead of the color attribute is to create a new image. So Shift A, I will search for image texture. We'll drop this down and I'll say I want to create a new image. So I click new and I want to call it IM test. I'll change the resolution so we can choose the quality that we're going to get. So 4096 by 4096. The base color I want to keep as black. I'm not bothered about alpha because it's only going to be black and white. We don't need transparency on this image. So I'll turn that off. Generate the type as blank. It doesn't need to be 32-bit because we don't need that sort of range of different values. It's just going to be 0 to 256. We don't want it to be tiled either. And we'll click OK. We've now got this new image available to us, which we can come across down here. We'll create a new editor. And we'll make this the image editor. And we'll open up the new image we've just created, image test. Now you can see we've got a completely black image. Now what I want to do is paint onto the object the same way as I did before when I was using the vertex colors. I mean, I could paint on here. If I go into paint mode of the image editor, and then we can bring up the side panel here to choose the draw brush, and then the end panel to choose the colors that I'm going to be drawing, just the same as when we did it with the vertex colors. We've got all the same options, which is quite good in Blender. all the brush settings and things are pretty much the same between different types of editor. But anyway, I want to paint either in here or in there. Now, if I paint in here, it's going to be difficult to paint the exact parts of the model that I want to. So let's say, for example, let's plug this in now directly. You can see we've got the output of the image, this image, black image here. And if I paint on here, like that, let's have a look where that's happened. We can't actually see it because we're not using any UV coordinates, which of course we need to set to tell it how to position this texture onto the object. So I'm going to quickly go into edit mode and look under UV maps. We don't have one yet. And I'm going to say, select everything. I'm going to say U, and we'll just do a smart UV project for this one. And we'll say OK. This should create us some UVs that we can see now in the image editor. Come back out into object mode. You can see we're now able to paint over here, and we get a result in here. But obviously, again, we're not able to sort of get a good idea of whereabouts that's going to appear on the mesh. It's not really making much sense over here. You've got one eye down here, we've got half a smile there, and then we've got the other bit over here. So it's not positioned how I'd want it. Now, it doesn't matter, because what we can do is go into texture paint mode in the 3D editor, and we can paint directly onto the texture in here. So let me just image and then choose to reload it. Because we've not saved it yet, it's going to go back to the original black image. And now we can start painting directly onto the 3D model. Now, this particular model is so high resolution, it's probably going to kill your computer if you try and draw a large area. So say I had a brush this size, it would probably crash Blender. Because unfortunately, currently, the texture painting in Blender in the 3D viewport is really bad. So on a low resolution model or a normal resolution model, it's fine. But something like this, which is crazy dense with geometry, it's not going to be great. So I'll make the brush quite small, and then I'll start painting on. And now we're able to do the same thing we did before. But you'll notice, because the geometry is so high resolution, we've probably got multiple faces from the edge of each island on the UV map sharing a single pixel on the image that we're drawing onto. So to fix this, we'd need to increase the resolution quite substantially of the image that we're drawing onto. Or we could use less UV islands and bigger margins between the islands. And if we plug this back in here, and we plug this one now into the factor, it's going to be controlled based on the texture that we drew on the image. And there we are. So there are all the different ways you can do it. Now, we're going to do it the first way on this mesh. So let's get rid of all this now. We'll come out of texture paint mode back into object mode. And we're going to start selecting the different areas of the model and then assign the materials in edit mode. And to make the selection, we're actually going to do that in sculpt mode, because we can take advantage of face sets. So we go into sculpt mode, and we can hide this bit on the side now. We're not going to need that. And the only tools we're going to need are going to be the face set draw tool. So choose that one. And the face set thing I'm going to use the most is going to be expand face set by topology, which is Shift W currently in Blender, but just check in here for the shortcut. We'll start with the tongue. I'm going to press Shift W with my mouse over the end of the tongue, and then we can start drawing a face set until it gets to the end. I'm not sure why the tooth's getting involved in there. I seem to have accidentally connected the tooth now for some reason. So I'm going to quickly get rid of that. I'm going to go into edit mode. Not sure when that happened, but never mind. We'll go into choose this part of the mesh. So number 2, and let's see if I can select around there. We'll just press number 1 to go into vertex mode. I'm just going to select all the way around, and then we'll delete those vertices. And I want to fill in these faces now. We'll just get rid of these rogue little ones there. Number 2 for edge mode. I'm going to select all the way around the outside. I'll just press F to fill. And then I'll repeat the same procedure on the other side. Tab, into sculpt mode. And I'm going to remesh to get rid of the bad geometry, which we're going to have here, where we made that selection. So I'm just going to do Control R to remesh. That's remeshed. But unfortunately, because the remesh didn't have a low enough resolution, each of those little squares was actually larger than the gap between the tongue and the tooth. So it's reconnected it again. So I'm going to actually undo the remesh until we're back here. And then I'll press R to change the remesh size, so we've got smaller squares, so that that gap doesn't get automatically joined when I do the remesh. Press Ctrl R to remesh, and now we're no longer getting that problem. And now we should be able to expand that tongue using the expand by face set with Shift W without overlapping those teeth. So bring it to the end of the tongue, to about there. Or maybe actually we'll go a little bit further, so let's do that again. Maybe to about here. Now just before, because it's reliant on the actual geometry, we're not able to get a nice smooth result. We're getting a harsh jagged edge where each of those faces are. Well, this is why we've used face sets, because the face sets will allow us to manipulate the topology around the edge of that marked face set. So go into the mesh filter tool, the operation to be relaxed face sets, and now we can drag this and it will actually modify the geometry at the edge of the face set to make it sort of a more smooth, less jaggedy result. And now we'll select the tongue by hovering over it and pressing H so that we've only got the tongue. And if we go into edit mode now, we're only going to have the tongue in edit mode as well, which means we can now go into face mode, we'll select all the faces, and we'll assign the tongue material to that part of the mesh. And then we can press Alt H to unhide everything, and then we can go back into sculpt mode, and we can continue working as we did before. So let's hide the tongue by hovering over the rest of the model and pressing H. And the next thing I want to do is assign the material to the teeth. So we'll do the same again, Shift W, give it a second, and then we can start dragging until we get to the end of the tooth. And we'll do this for each tooth. And actually, to make this quicker, make sure we turn back on symmetry. Just going to do it on both sides. And now we've got all of those teeth selected, we can isolate the teeth by hovering over the rest of the model and pressing Shift H. So that will hide the bit we're over and leave the rest remaining. And now what I want to do is make all of these the same face set. So I'll go into face sets and I'll say face set from visible. And now we've got one face set on there. Let's do that again to get a different color. There we go. And if I do Alt H now, we can unhide the rest of the model, and we can do the same we did before to smooth out the corners of these teeth. So make sure we've got this brush selected still, mesh filter, and it's in relaxed face set mode. Now we can just drag across, and because they're all the same face set, it will affect them all. There we go. So we've got a nice edge to each of these teeth. And we'll do H with the mouse hovered over one of them. We'll go into edit mode. We'll select everything. We'll now assign the teeth to those selected parts of the mesh. Back into sculpt mode. And we'll press Alt H to unhide everything. And this time we're going to do hide these two. So I'll hover the mouse over the face set that I want to keep visible, and I'll press H. That will hide everything else. And now we can work on the gums. So we'll change across to this brush, the draw face set. And now I'm going to start drawing around these teeth. Now, I don't want to be able to see the rest of the object, otherwise I'm going to be drawing through these holes up onto the top of the head. So we'll choose the box hide tool on the left-hand side from the tools menu. is hide the top of the model, we'll hide the back of the model, and we'll hide the bottom of the model as well. So I can't draw through now and accidentally paint onto the other areas. Right. We can start drawing a face set on here, and we'll go round. And if we let go of the mouse and start drawing again, we're going to get a different face set colour. So I'll just undo that. To continue the same colour, you put your mouse over the part you want to continue, and you hold Control when you start drawing, and then you can let go of Control. I think I'll use the same material inside the mouth, so I'll just expand that face set to all the way inside the mouth. So now we've got the gum face set, and if I want to tidy up a bit over here and make the brush a bit smaller, I'm going to take that across like that. And maybe over here, I'll press Control on the part on the old face set and just tidy up by dragging this across. Maybe I want to bring this bit out. Control that, bring that across like that. So I think that's looking quite good. And what I can do now is relax the face set again using the mesh filter tool. I'll just draw across until the edge is nice and smooth. And then H on this one. Oh, not that one. H on this one. So we've just got the gums into edit mode. We'll select all the faces, come out of full screen mode by pressing Control Spacebar, and then I'm going to assign the gums to this selection. And then finally, we go back into sculpt mode, and do Alt H to unhide everything. And I just want to choose this area now, so I'm going to press H, so it hides everything else apart from this face set into edit mode. A to select everything, and then we'll assign the skin. And then we'll press Alt H to unhide everything on the model, back into object mode. We've now got this object with all of these different materials assigned to different areas. So let's just do a cycles render and we'll tweak the materials a little bit. So go into cycles and let's just add a HDRI world environment, just the same as we did before. And we'll add a environment texture. We'll connect this one up to the background. And I'll press Ctrl T to create the mapping automatically using Node Wrangler. And then I'll choose a HDRI image. And then we go into Cycles Viewport mode. We can now start tweaking the material. So let's go to Object mode in the shader editor. We'll go over here to the material section so we can choose the materials here more quickly. We can also do that, by the way, over here in the slots. So whichever one's more easy for you. And we can start making modifications now to this, to the materials we've set. So let's first go with the skin. I'm going to turn up the subsurface scattering a bit. I'll make the skin colour a little bit darker. And we'll probably make it a little bit greasy. I'll turn the roughness down a bit. Alright, and then we'll go for the gums. And we'll do the same thing. We'll turn up a bit of subsurface scattering. So the light sort of bounces around inside the object like skin or organic matter. And I'll make the subsurface colour a bit darker this time. Let me turn that up a bit more. And we'll do the same for the teeth. So this time for the teeth, I'm going to make this really shiny. So I'll turn the roughness right down. I'll make them a little bit yellow. A bit more grotesque. And then for the tongue, we'll turn the roughness down to make it more wet. And maybe make it a bit of a darker red. Something like that. I think for the eyeballs, we'll set these eyeballs, right click and choose Shade Smooth. I'm going to give these a new material as well. So click new at the top. I'll make these black. I'll probably give this subsurface scattering as well. Or alternatively, what we could do is use transmission. So if we turn the transmission up, and we'll make this red. So we've got glass red eyes. I think that looks quite good. And we can control the roughness over here, like so. So turn the roughness down, we've got nice glossy eyes. But we can make the transmission rough, so we can't see straight through, by turning the transmission roughness up a little bit. And of course, as we discussed earlier, when we looked at all the differences between Blender 3.6 and Blender 4, you've no longer got transmission roughness. You're just going to control it with the main roughness of the material, and then you can use the coat to bring back the glossy reflections. Probably make that skin a little bit darker, in fact. Let's come to the skin. We'll turn the subsurface colour down a little bit. Something like that. Maybe make it a little bit red. And again, I know we've discussed this, but in Blender 4.0, the subsurface is going to be a little bit different. So let's go into the subsurface options, and we'll turn up the weight. And we'll set this to be random walk skin, because that's what we're doing. We'll give it more of a skin colour. We're going to use the base colour this time, because we've no longer got the subsurface colour. Make it a little bit more lighter. So we've got this sort of a colour. And then we can use the main roughness up here. And if we want to, we can add some coat to it as well, if you want to add a bit more shine to the skin. And then we can use the scale to scale up how far the red, green and blue rays will travel through the object. So increase the scale until you get the effect that you want, depending on how big your object is. And there we are. So it's practically the same. The only difference is we've got a scale option now. We've also got the base colour controlling the subsurface colour. And we'll maybe set the IOR to something like 1.8, which might be a better value for skin.